you exhibit an obvious, very high level intellect throughout. It's always very accessible and clear, but you clearly, you've been around some thinkers in your life and you've clearly read a few books. There's no question about that. But I think to me, where you stand apart from almost everybody, not everybody, almost everybody, there are a few colleagues, I think they're friends of yours who do this too, but you have, to me, what I see is a very open and generous heart, and in particular toward people who do drugs and have done drugs. And it's that in itself is revolutionary, because until very recently, all we did was pity them or shame them or be angry at them and attempt to regulate, control, or punish them. But you're not at all interested in any of that. You're interested in understanding them, I think, on their own terms, and then also using their experience to maybe make an offer to the viewers that can, of new possibilities for them and drugs.
Well, certainly. I mean, I think when you look at a sort of typical television depiction of drug use in a show like Intervention, the way that the use is described is that this person's life is a mess, and the reason their life is a mess is because of drug use. But they almost always end up undoing their own thesis somewhere in the episode, where they start talking about how the person was a victim of some kind of sexual or physical abuse as a child, or how their marriage or their career fell apart for some reason. There's always some sort of external stressor or psychological problem associated with it. And then when you look at it through that lens, a very different picture emerges, one where the drug use is actually the only good thing in a terrible life.
Right.
Instead of the drug use being a tragedy, the drug use is solace in a life that is a tragedy. And I see that all the time, in South Africa, where you have a lot of people using Quaalude, or they call it Mandrax. I remember I was selecting music to play behind some of the scenes of people smoking Mandrax, and there's a standards and practices department, and they said, oh, well, you can't play celebratory music while people are using drugs. That will what was their word? Glorify the use of drugs. Yeah. Right. And it's like, well, this is a glorious moment for them. They are spending their day poaching abalone, doing various difficult, dangerous labor. And at the end of a hard day, they get to gather with their friends and have a good time and smoke this drug that makes them happy. This is a celebration. This is the good thing in an otherwise very painful and difficult existence.
That's so radical and so breathtaking. I want to stay there. I want to stay on this. The only solace, you said, in a life of tragedy, the only solace in a life of tragedy, that's what these drugs are for these people. Now, I need everybody just to sit there for a second and think about that. Because the reactions are going to be across the board on this one. I mean, people are going to say, oh, well, I don't know. What do they say? They say that it's distracting them from solving the real problems in their life. It will cause them to deteriorate faster. They'll become incompetent. They'll become more depressed. Their lives will become more tragic, on and on. But to actually, so when I was teaching at Columbia, at Barnard, at the New School, these very fancy elite colleges with all these bourgeois children running around, from suburbs and who went to prep school. And I was teaching US history, and when I would get to the war on drugs, the history of the war on drugs, I would just stop and say, hey, listen, here's a point that I've never heard anybody make. This was in the 1990s and 2000s when I was teaching. At that point, I'd never heard this stated, and this is one of the reasons I love your work. I said to them, I've never heard anyone state publicly or even privately what has always been just obvious to me, which is that people do drugs because, newsflash, they make you feel better. They make you feel better. That's it. Can we just state that for the record and, stipulate it? Because the way drugs are talked about, it's as if the second you shoot the heroin into your arm, you feel worse. It makes it worse. Everything's worse. right? I mean, that just the cognitive, like whatever that is, gymnastics it's really an act of repression, don't you think, to deny the pleasure that people get from drugs?
Oh, absolutely. And it creates an environment where people fundamentally don't understand anyone else's motivation. So if you look at
Yeah.
something like whatever the maligned drug du jour is, if it's bath salts or K2 slash spice slash synthetic cannabinoids or fentanyl or whatever, you only hear bad things. If you
Mm-hmm.
only hear bad things about bath salts, how can you have empathy for anybody that uses them? These drugs that are poisonous, that make you psychotic, that
Mm-hmm.
turn you into a zombie killer.
Right.
Why would you'd have to be a fool to use these poisonous, terrible, terrible drugs. But, and that's the logical conclusion if all of the reporting is being done by people with no understanding of the pharmacology, the chemistry, but also more importantly, the experience of consuming these substances. Because if they did consume any of them in a responsible way, they would get it. They would understand, oh, these are drugs that cause euphoria and stimulation, and that's beneficial for a variety of reasons. It might give you the energy to do a job that you hate. It
Right.
might allow you to enjoy time with your significant other when you're stressed and preoccupied with the job that you hate. It might allow you to relax. It might do any number of beneficial things. And that's why people are using it. They're not using it because they're crazy. If you just assume that all this use is a product of insanity on the part of the user or pathology on the part of the user, then you are fundamentally misunderstanding the motivations for the consumption of these things in the first place.
Right.